2 days ago, Mexicans went to the polls and elected a new president, Enrique Peña.
15 horas con...
Federal agents. El Mayo will spend the rest of his life.
In order to be successful, and you people are well on the road to success.
How does a democracy survive when its president is bought by a cartel? The night the accusation broke, Mexico City trembled. Streetlights flickered against walls, tagged with cartel warnings, and in living rooms across the nation, television anchors spoke words no citizen wanted to believe. Former President Enrique Peña Nieto accused of taking a $100 million bribe from Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. It wasn't just a scandal, it was an exposure, a revelation that the very spine of Mexico's leadership had been cracked open by corruption. The morning after the revelation, Mexico awoke to silence the kind that follows an explosion. Soldiers guarded ministries, journalists vanished, and citizens whispered of the parallel state rising beneath their feet. Reuters traced cartel money to police commanders, judges, and regional governors. BBC News called it the anatomy of a captured democracy. In court, Alex Cifuentes' words hung heavy. We paid everyone, from generals to ministers. The testimony exposed a network where loyalty wasn't sworn to the flag, but to the peso. DW described it as a republic in the shadows ruled by invisible hands. Mexico's institutions had become mirrors, reflecting power that no longer belonged to the state. Jane's Defense Weekly reported that cartels like Sinaloa and CJNG possessed weapons and technology rivaling small nations. Armored convoys, encrypted radios, surveillance drones, all sourced through black markets and corrupt contracts. Defense News confirmed Pentagon concerns that these networks operated with military discipline, executing operations that resembled insurgent campaigns rather than criminal ventures. President Trump's Intelligence Council convened in Washington. Analysts presented evidence of cartel payments to active duty Mexican officers totaling more than 12 million since 2010. They're no longer gangs. One defense source warned they are an army wearing civilian clothes. For Trump, the conclusion was clear. This wasn't a law enforcement issue, it was national defense. The White House issued a classified directive to map the financial arteries of Mexico's narco state. U.S. cyber teams began tracking transactions through Panama, Belize, and Miami. The Guardian reported that a joint task force discovered offshore accounts linked to former political figures, accounts filled with drug profits disguised as investment funds. The depth of the infiltration shocked even seasoned investigators. Meanwhile, ordinary Mexicans paid the price. BBC News told the story of Maria, a mother in Michoacan whose son was killed for refusing cartel recruitment. The soldiers never came, she said, only men with rifles and badges. DW called it governance by terror, where silence was safer than law. Entire towns became ghost cities. The message was simple: obey or vanish. From Washington's perspective, every bribe, every death was another fracture in the hemisphere's stability. The Guardian warned that Mexico's corruption could destabilize the region as profoundly as Syria or Venezuela. Trump, facing pressure from security advisors, ordered contingency plans to protect U.S. citizens and interests. Drone patrols intensified along the Rio Grande. Intelligence sharing doubled. The Pentagon began treating cartel activity as a hybrid sovereignty crisis. Globally, the parallels multiplied. Russia's Wagner Group, Iran's Revolutionary Guards, China's triads, each fused crime with state authority. Mexico was becoming the Western Hemisphere's mirror to that trend. And through the haze of denial and fear, one name kept surfacing, whispered in courtrooms, repeated in classified memos: Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the last ghost of the Sinaloa Empire. The man who knew every secret, paid every bribe, and could destroy Mexico's illusions with a single confession. When a government shares the same financiers as its enemies, how long before the two become one and the same? According to Reuters, the accusation surfaced during El Chapo's 2019 trial in Brooklyn, where trafficker Alex Cifuentes testified that the money was delivered as Peña Nieto prepared to assume power. The Guardian reported that the exchange guaranteed protection for the Sinaloa cartel, a contract written in silence and blood. Official denials followed within hours, but the public knew better. The streets already whispered the truth. It was a gray morning in Brooklyn when the last ghost stepped from the shadows. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the unseen architect of the Sinaloa cartel, entered the courthouse where El Chapo had fallen years before. Cameras flashed, but he didn't flinch. His beard was white, his eyes distant, his legend intact. For decades, he had been the phantom of Mexico's underworld, untouchable, invisible, immortal. But on this day, the ghost was cornered. Reuters confirmed that Zambada faced 17 federal charges, each tied to killing, smuggling, and corruption, stretching across 2 decades. The prosecution's aim was not only conviction, it was revelation. As The Guardian reported, Washington's true goal was to expose the names behind the money. The trial was less about one man and more about the anatomy of an empire. Inside the courtroom, Zambada's testimony sent shockwaves from Brooklyn to Mexico City. He spoke softly, almost wearily, but his words cut deep. He detailed a system where generals, governors, and mayors were all on his payroll. Jane's Defense Weekly estimated that his organization spent $50 million annually on bribery alone, a budget of corruption, one analyst called it. One revelation silenced the room. A top military commander once demanded a $10 million bribe to secure safe passage for cocaine shipments through Sonora. Zambada admitted he refused not from principle, but from personal animosity. He hated El Chapo more than he feared me, he said. The courtroom murmured. It wasn't morality dividing Mexico's power, it was rivalry. DW drew grim parallels to Russia's oligarch mafia nexus and Iran's smuggling elites, warning that when the line between power and crime disappears, nations become syndicates. Zambada's empire, stretching from Guerrero's jungles to Chicago's suburbs, blurred every legal boundary. His cartel ran schools, built roads, and even negotiated with local mayors. The state had outsourced governance to criminals. In Washington, President Trump's advisors saw opportunity amid chaos. Defense News reported that the Pentagon had begun rewriting its doctrine for North American security, framing cartels as non-state military actors. Plans emerged for active deterrence operations, combining drone surveillance, cyber disruption, and special forces coordination with vetted Mexican units. The new doctrine treated narco networks like insurgents, not smugglers. But the political risk was immense. Al Jazeera warned that Zambada's cooperation might implicate figures within President Claudia Sheinbaum's administration. Already, whispers in Mexico City spoke of ministers and governors who once accepted cartel donations now panicking over what might surface. The Guardian reported an atmosphere of fear inside Los Pinos, not from assassins, but from subpoenas. Outside the courthouse, protesters carried photos of missing relatives. If he tells the truth, one woman cried to BBC News, "Maybe we'll find our children." For families destroyed by decades of silence, Zambada's confession was both vengeance and salvation. Trump's Justice Department framed the trial as proof that America's war on corruption no longer stopped at the border. If cartels act as terrorists, a senior official told Reuters, "We'll treat them as such." But the question lingered. Could the truth of one man's crimes cleanse a nation built on his lies? Under neon skies, outrage spread. DW described Mexico as a democracy haunted by criminal sovereignty. Governors, generals, and judges, once trusted protectors, now stood accused of sharing the same paymasters as the cartel. It was a betrayal that reached every level of power. Even the military was not immune. When confession becomes the only path to justice, does it reveal redemption or prove that justice was never real to begin with? The storm over Mexico City broke just days after Zambada's confession. Lightning arced above the National Palace as President Claudia Sheinbaum stood before the cameras, her voice trembling behind practiced calm. "We will not surrender to fear," she said. But outside, gunfire cracked in the night. Her words were drowned by reality. BBC News reported that Mexico's homicide rate had reached its highest point in modern history. In Culiacan, entire police forces defected to the CJNG cartel. In Acapulco, soldiers were ambushed by convoys armed with US-made rifles. Reuters confirmed that governors and mayors had vanished after refusing cartel demands. A nation once promised peace, now drowned in its own promises. Sheinbaum's philosophy, abrazos no balazos, hugs, not bullets, was meant to heal Mexico's social wounds, but DW called it a peace plan written for a country no longer at peace. Cartels exploited every inch of leniency, embedding themselves deeper into local governments, buying loyalty not just with fear, but with food jobs and money. Al Jazeera described the paradox, a state that preaches compassion but survives through negotiation with killers. In Washington, patience snapped. President Donald Trump publicly demanded joint operations to neutralize cartel strongholds. America will defend its people, he said, citing rising fentanyl deaths as a national emergency. According to Defense News, Trump's National Security Council drew up a classified proposal precision strikes on cartel compounds across Sinaloa and Michoacan. The Pentagon codenamed it Operation Sentinel Rain. Sheinbaum refused. Sovereignty is sacred, she declared on national television. But as Jane's Defense Weekly revealed, her own generals had already briefed Washington in secret, fearing the government was losing control. For the United States, the border was no longer a line, it was a front. Trump's doctrine hardened. Drones patrolled the skies over Texas and Arizona, mapping cartel corridors. Surveillance balloons, AI tracking, and electronic countermeasures created what The Guardian called the most advanced border command grid in American history. The strategy marked a transformation from containment to active defense. Inside Mexico, chaos metastasized. DW reported that more than 900 civilians had been killed in Sinaloa since September, Teachers Farmers Police. We live between two armies, one mother told The Guardian. Both say they protect us, neither does. Sheinbaum's government fractured under pressure. Allies turned accusers. Senator Lily Tellez claimed on Fox Noticias that campaign donations were funneled through CJNG front companies. Her warning ignited outrage across social media. Within hours, the senator received death threats and government silence. Al Jazeera's editorial declared bluntly Mexico's war is no longer against cartels, it's against itself. And in the Oval Office, Trump's advisors echoed that sentiment. America could no longer rely on diplomacy to stop a collapse at its doorstep. Across the border, Washington watched closely. President Donald Trump informed through a defense news briefing called The Revelations a direct threat to U.S. security. Intelligence analysts traced cartel cash flowing through Miami shell companies, blending narco profits with legitimate business networks. The numbers were staggering. The Pentagon, citing Jane's Defense Weekly, estimated $12 billion in annual revenue from the fentanyl trade alone, a trade poisoning over 200 Americans a day. The U.S. saw Mexico's unraveling as a geopolitical warning, a failed state emerging next to the world's largest democracy. The parallels were haunting Kiev under siege Beirut under militias, now Mexico under its own monsters. If compassion cannot contain corruption, can sovereignty still shield a nation from its own decay? The order came at dawn, swift, silent, absolute. Designate them as terrorists. With that stroke of President Donald Trump's pen, America's Southern war transformed overnight. The cartels of Mexico, Sinaloa, CJNG Gulf were no longer criminal syndicates. They were officially foreign terrorist organizations. Reuters broke the story. First, the declaration granted the United States authority to strike cartel targets globally without prior consent. Under the new classification, U.S. forces could pursue, capture, or eliminate narco leaders, as they would ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Trump called it a war for our nation's soul. The Pentagon, according to Defense News, initiated Operation Iron Veil, a sweeping expansion of the Southern Defense Network. 2 national defense corridors were built along the border, lined with radar towers, AI-linked drones, and armored brigades. A new doctrine emerged: preemptive containment. Jane's Defense Weekly described it as counterterrorism adapted for the Western Hemisphere. The Guardian noted the historic ruptured diplomacy replaced by deterrence. No more patience, no more talks. Trump's message was unmistakable. America would secure its frontier with force, even if that meant crossing invisible lines. The age of excuses is over, one White House official told DW. But the move ignited global shockwaves. Al Jazeera reported that Beijing and Moscow condemned the decision, warning it mirrored preemptive strikes in Iraq and Syria. Iran's state media called it the militarization of the Americas. Yet inside, the U.S. support surged. Families of overdose victims filled Capitol Hill, holding photos of sons and daughters lost to fentanyl. If Mexico can't stop them, one grieving father told Reuters, "We will." For Trump, the timing was strategic. With Washington facing threats from Beijing and Tehran proving American dominance at home, sent a message abroad the U.S. would not tolerate chaos on its doorstep. Intelligence analysts warned that cartels had expanded beyond drugs into cybercrime, human trafficking, even weapons smuggling for foreign powers. Mexico's underworld was now an international marketplace of terror. Behind the scenes, Defense News confirmed the development of contingency strike plans, covert raids resembling counter-terror missions in Afghanistan. Precision drones, fast response teams, and electronic warfare units stood ready. Though unacknowledged publicly, the Pentagon had drawn red circles across northern Mexico's map. President Sheinbaum's response was defiant. Sovereignty is not for sale, she declared. Yet, The Guardian revealed leaked intelligence showing panic inside her cabinet, fear not only of American intervention, but of exposure. U.S. financial investigators had traced millions in narco payments to offshore accounts linked to Mexican politicians. In the courtroom, the testimony sounded like fiction, but in the barrios of Sinaloa, the fear was real. Families told BBC News that their mayors had vanished for refusing cartel offers. One widow said, "We paid them for protection, but they killed my husband anyway." In Mexico, justice wasn't blind, it was bought. Trump's advisors framed the issue as moral clarity sovereignty ends where terror begins. DW's analysis put it bluntly, the US is redefining the border not as geography, but as principle. As Reaper drones rose over the Rio Grande, their lenses glinting in the sun, America's frontier shimmered with both power and peril. The hum of engines blended with the tension of history repeating itself. If the defense of freedom demands crossing borders, how far will America go before it crosses its own line? It began as a routine Senate session and ended as the moment Mexico's democracy imploded on live television. The national anthem had barely finished when shouting erupted. Opposition leader Alejandro Alito Moreno accused President Claudia Sheinbaum's government of surrendering to the cartels. "You call it sovereignty," he thundered. "I call it treason." The microphone cut mid-sentence. Within seconds, chaos consumed the chamber. Lawmakers shoved, swung fists, and screamed accusations. Cameras caught every second the world watching a democracy tear itself apart. Reuters described the brawl as a portrait of a government at war with itself. The Senate floor became a battleground of fear and fury. DW reported that security guards fled as the confrontation spread, leaving senators bloodied and broken under the flag they no longer served. The symbolism was brutal, the House of Law collapsing into lawlessness. Outside protests erupted across Culiacan, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. Thousands filled the streets, waving American flags, not Mexican ones. BBC News cameras captured their chants, "Help us, Trump, save our children." A woman holding a photo of her murdered son wept into the lens. "We have no government," she said, "only the cartels." The scenes gripped Washington. President Trump's National Security Council met overnight as Defense News warned that instability was spreading northward, threatening border trade migration and U.S. security itself. The Pentagon raised alert levels for National Guard units across Texas and Arizona. The crisis was no longer Mexico's alone, it was continental. The Guardian wrote that as senators fought under marble domes, gunfire echoed through the barrios. Cartel militias advanced on police stations in Sinaloa, torching vehicles and seizing weapons. Al Jazeera confirmed that over 900 civilians had been killed in a single month. The line between war and politics vanished completely. For the United States, the stakes grew existential. If Mexico fell to narco rule, it would mark the first collapse of a major democracy within America's orbit. Trump addressed the nation in a televised statement, "We will not allow terror to govern our neighbors. The defense of liberty does not stop at the border." Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly warned that U.S. intervention, if launched, would redefine 21st century warfare, a hybrid conflict blending counterterrorism, cyber operations, and financial warfare. Yet they also cautioned no drone can rebuild a democracy once it collapses from within. Trump's administration saw the pattern clearly. Corruption was no longer a domestic Mexican problem, it was a hemispheric crisis, a virus of money and fear that could cross the border as easily as drugs and guns. His national security team vowed to expose every link, every account, every official in the chain. As night descended, the Senate lay in ruins, its marble floors stained with blood and tear gas. Outside, riot police clashed with protesters chanting for justice or vengeance. The chaos radiated outward like a shock wave, a nation imploding under the weight of its own corruption. Across the Rio Grande Reaper, drones tracked the fires from the sky, their cameras reflecting the flames of a democracy burning itself alive. The hum of their rotors mixed with the echo of distant sirens, a requiem for a country that once believed ballots could outlast bullets. When freedom collapses next door, how long before its echoes reach the walls of the world's strongest democracy? The parallels were global. In Ukraine, oligarchs had funded proxy wars. In Iran, smuggling empires financed the Revolutionary Guards. In China, triad money secured political loyalty. The same blueprint now appeared in Mexico, a state eaten from within. But as night fell over the capital, one truth lingered in the air. This wasn't just a crime of bribery, it was the death of trust. And when trust dies, what remains of a nation's soul? If power can be bought with cash and fear, who really governs Mexico now? Its president or its cartels?